So here's where we see the graphic part. If you have a flood map with you, this is on panel 38, if you want to take a look at it. If not, I've made it pretty large so you can see here. So this is where we start to turn the whole technical verbiage, facts, numbers, letters, into being able to read this representation on a map. So I open up my map, and I see the area that says Zone AO. Prior to the slide before, well, hopefully you knew what it was, but prior to the slide before, you'd say, hey, I don't know what that means, but I see that area, and the reason it's important now is I see that it says Zone AO, which is what kind of flooding? Shallow sheet flow flooding. Only here it says a depth of 2. Because remember what I said, it doesn't have a BFE, it's only shown in depth. The other thing that's important to remember is it may not always say the word depth before it. It may just have that 2 feet in parentheses. But you have to remember if it's AO, that's the depth, that's not the base flood elevation. And we have a note, it says the number shown is depth, not BFE. On the very same map, panel 38, is our retention pond. Zone AH. What is Zone AH? Ponding. And look at that, it's a retention pond. Wow, this stuff actually works. And what do we have here? We have a number, and that is the BFE. That elevation is our base flood elevation. So if I ask you what the BFE is of the retention pond number 1 on that map panel, I'm going to find the retention pond. I'm going to say, hey, there it is, Zone AH. And I mean, that could be, think about it, if you had a customer that says, hey, I'm buying a piece of parcel and I see there's a retention pond on it, I don't know what that means. There's a whole bunch of letters and numbers. You'd be able to say, well, that's the retention pond Zone AH is because ponding occurs. That's the kind of flooding that occurs there. And that number is the base flood elevation.
I can't read the number whatever.
It has
10 feet?
Yeah.
EL10? And yeah, and that's another thing. When you look at some of these flood maps, they're not the easiest to read, only because you got a lot of information in a little space. You know, we're not talking about fancy colors. We're talking about halftones and gray shading. But the important things to remember on these 2 items are, if I'm AO, no BFE, sheet flow. If I'm AH, I'm ponding, and I do have a BFE. And I'll show you some other items that we'll talk about along the way that put these into perspective and why they're important.
Is X the benchmark?
Which one? No, this is another flood zone. So
Zone X there, yeah.
if we have Zone X, it'll be the actual zone.
Okay, yeah.
Benchmarks may be BM, RM, and I'll show you something along the way as we do this. One of the hints, clues, tidbits I'll give you is a lot of information can be found from the map itself, and we'll talk about that. The minute you start taking the test, get the map out, open it up. I mean, it's going to remind you of a lot of stuff along the way. I know that sounds kind of counterintuitive that, hey, wait a minute, how's the map going to help me? They're asking me questions on the map. But get the map out because it's going to remind you of things along the way. Don't wait until the map questions. Get the map out beforehand, just so as you're looking at things, you're remembering things. It's triggering your memory on some aspects.
Talk about the ledger.
Yeah. The legend.
A lot of definitions are in the ledger.
Yeah. The legend itself is key, and we'll see that in a minute. And as we talk about this, you don't really have to remember a lot. You just have to remember where to look for some of this stuff. Here we go. When we talk about zones. So the first question is, how many of you have all of these memorized? And if I asked you what they were, you knew what they were. And guess what? Neither do I. And you know what? You don't need to because it's on the map. That's one of the things. You get the map out. A lot of floodplain management is like the building code. People will come and ask me all the time. They come into my office and go, hey, what is section 1016.1.1 say about stairs in the building code? I'm like, I don't know. Let me look it up. And they're like, but you're the building official. I said the building codes stack up to almost 3 foot in thickness. I do not have them all memorized. That's why we buy code books. The same thing with this aspect. Yeah, the guy I work with, the floodplain manager, he's a little bit of a floodplain nerd, and he has all these memorized. I don't. The idea is, I know where to look for them, though. This is on the map. So we're going to read through these just so you know what they are, but keep in mind, this information is on the map for you. Use that. You know, it's no difference, and I'm not telling you anything that's a big secret from taking the test, because if somebody was asking you about their property, you wouldn't try to remember off the top of your head what certain numbers were. You'd get out the information to give your customer accurate details and accurate results. It's no different any other time. Yes?
Can you give an example of what you've seen in the test? Like, do they ask you to find the zone in this map, or how does it relate to the
Well, and the question was, because I give an example of what I've seen on the test. Well, I actually can't tell you what I've seen on the test, because part of with any class, you can't say you're teaching the test. Excuse me. But I can tell you that the test questions would be similar to any other question that somebody might ask you in your day-to-day business. And let's go back to this one, for example. So, you know, if somebody said, hey, I want some information about what's going on here. I'm looking at buying a piece of property right down here in this area. Can you tell me what flood zone it's in? So I might have to identify the flood zone. Or if somebody said, hey, we're looking at building a bridge or redoing the bridge on Argyle Way over top of this water body. What can you tell me about that AO? Does that mean that the water is going to be 2 feet higher, or that just that general information that you can say, no, that's actually, what is it?
depth?
It's the depth, yeah. So it's not necessarily the elevation that's required, that's the depth. And as we progress, you'll see some more, I've factored in some questions here that ask you about the maps. The general idea is, these are probably the same situations that anybody would ask you as a customer along the way, particularly if they're looking at buying a parcel of land or if they already own a parcel. Yes, sir?
So a good way to remember that is if it has the EL certification on the bottom of it, then it's usually has a BFE.
If it says EL, it's the elevation. The only thing, his question was, if it says EL on the maps, is it always the BFE? The thing you have to be cautious of that is they won't always show EL. Some of them just may have AH and then a number next to it. You just have to know that if it's an AH, that is the BFE elevation number. So
the same map could have AO with a 2 and then AH with a 10.
exactly,
You have to know that
exactly. You have to
BFE
know what those are.
So
And
is AO zone the only zone in?
AO is the only one that requires depth, that gives it its depth and doesn't have a BFE. So the point he just made was good. So I have to remember that the AO and the AH and what they're for, right? I could, or I could just bring this back up and read it right off here and say, oh, that's what those were. Because sometimes I get them confused, so instead of getting them confused, I'm going to look at the legend.
So the A1 through 30 is just a numeric identifier of a specific zone?
Yeah, I'm going to go through these so you get an idea. So let's talk about these. So in our Zone A, we have the 100-year base floodplains, 6 types. A is the base floodplain mapped by approximate methods. BFEs are not determined. This is often called an unnumbered A zone or approximate A's. A's 1 through 30 are known as the numbered A zones. This is the base floodplain where the firm shows a BFE. And these are old format. In a little bit, we're going to see what they call old format maps and new format maps. These are the old formats where we used to have that number. Sometimes the number would even correspond to the BFE, not all the time though. You won't see a lot of the newer maps that are being drawn with these anymore, but they still exist because some maps are that old. Something that's interesting, that's a little sidebar of this is, you know, a lot of people assume that there's maps for every area in the United States. And that's actually not true. There's still a significant part of the United States that is not mapped. There's a good report on the ASFPM website that talks about what the government's plan is for mapping and everything. And I forget the astronomical number, but it's in the billions to be able to map a lot of the unmapped parts of the country that do not have floodplain maps yet. Continue on AE, the base floodplain where base flood elevations are provided. AE zones are now used on new format firms instead of A1 through A30 zones. So does everybody understand firm is flood insurance rate map? AO, the base floodplain with sheet flow, ponding, or shallow flooding, base flood depths feet above the ground are provided. So it's depths. AH is our shallow flooding on the base floodplain. BFEs are provided. And these are those tricky ones that a lot of people never remember. But, unless you're in that immediate area. A99, area to be protected from base flood by levees or federal flood protection systems under construction. BFEs are not determined. So if I'm building a dam, if I'm building a levee, Lake Okeechobee down in Florida, the large freshwater lake in Florida, they're redoing what they call the Herbert Hoover Dike. Some of those areas are considered A99 because that is being reconstructed. I think part of New Orleans was the same way. As the levees and dams are being reconstructed, that area is going to become an A99 for a while. The time may depend on how long it takes to get the dam rebuilt, how long it takes to get the levee reconstructed, but that's the general idea. At that point in time, we know it's protected by one, so it's an A99.
Does it change at that point after it's used?
It could, yeah. At some point, depending on what the reconstruction results in, it could change out of there. What we don't want to happen is we don't want it to become an AR. The base floodplain that results from the decertification of a previously accredited flood protection system that is in the process of being restored. So an A99 was while it was being redone or restored, and then, hey, maybe things didn't go right, maybe they ran out of money, maybe they stopped halfway through, then it becomes an AR. That's something scary to tell people, hey, you really don't have the protection from the dam and levee that you thought you had before, so you're kind of on your own. And then our V zone for velocity. Anybody know what the magic number is in wave height where we determine that velocity? 3 feet. Coastal area is subject to a velocity hazard, wave action, where BFEs are not determined on the firm. And then we have VE, the coastal area is subject to velocity hazard, where BFEs are provided on the firm. Then we have Zone B and Zone X. Area of moderate flood hazard, usually the area between the limits of the 100-year and 500-year floods. B zones are also used to designate base floodplains of lesser hazards, such as areas protected by levees from the 100-year flood, or shallow flooding areas with the average depth of less than 1 foot, or drainage areas of less than 1 square mile. My goodness, that's a mouthful.
Yeah, what is that?
Right.
I've read that 7 times.
And first of all, do we need to memorize all that? No, because it's right here on the legend, on the map.
Yeah, but I need to understand it after I read it.
Well, let's read the next one, and we'll compare the two. So then our Zone C and Zone X, area of minimal flood hazard, usually depicted on firms as above the 500-year flood level. Zone C may have ponding or local drainage problems that don't warrant a detailed study or designation as base floodplain. Zone X is the area determined to be outside the 500-year flood and protected by levee from the 100-year flood. And then finally, Zone D is the area of undetermined but possible flood hazards. So don't let anybody ever say, well, it's Zone D, it's not going to flood there. No, that's not true. They just haven't determined anything, but it still could flood there. So when we talk about this, let's break this down piece by piece. It says area of moderate flood hazard, usually area between the limits of 100 and 500-year floods. So what do you think is more common, a 100-year flood or a 500-year flood? 100-year. That's why it's a 500-year flood. It very rarely is going to occur, but it could. Then we say the B zones are also used to designate base floodplains of lesser hazard, such as area protected by levees from the 100-year flood, or shallow flooding areas with average depths of less than 1 foot, or drainage areas of less than 1 square mile. So we're shading those areas because we know that they may have shallow flooding in those areas, but look, it's less than 1 foot. So if it was 2 feet, what would we call it? AO. So those are the areas where we know flooding occurs and it's shallow, but it's not very deep. But I don't want to put the flooding doesn't occur there. But I know it's not deep enough to be 2 feet, so I don't want to call it an AO.
Is it less than or equal, or is it just, let's say it's exactly 1 foot, would that be an AO?
No, because typically when you read into more of AOs, that's the fundamental is 2 feet for an AO. Okay. And they detail that in the 480 manual. So the little gray areas are, this is for those areas that we know that flood, but they don't flood deep enough with the depth to become an AO. And you're right, it's a gray area, that's why they call them shaded. No, that was a bad one. But the idea was, it's not an area that I can say it never floods. And it's not an area that I can say, hey, you don't have to worry about it. But I can't tell you that it's going to flood deep enough to the 2-foot depth to be an AO. And then I come back with my other one.
The levee and the drainage. Why the reference to the levee and the drainage?
Because that's maybe why it floods. And this is my guess, that at some point in time they determined a lot of these areas could flood from levees topping over maybe if the levees aren't big enough. And yet we don't want to say that it's, the levee, it's certified, it's not under construction, so it doesn't fall into one of these two, but we know that at some point in time that levee may overtop and we may get some minor flooding that comes by way of that. But it's not enough to cause major problems. No, but if you want to sit in the floodplain manager class, you're more than welcome.
Unless it breaks.
So behind every, what borders an X in most cases is gonna be a levee. Yes or no?
No, a levee doesn't always have to border an X. Yeah. They've just thrown that in there because I think studies have shown that that situation can occur there, and then this is what we would deem that plain, that floodplain, because we don't want to say it's this one. We don't want to say it's unshaded, that it's an area of minimal flood. Because if we portray that as area of minimal flood, and then they get a foot of flooding there, somebody's going to go, well, wait a minute. That area was low enough, you had a foot of flood water there. It wasn't deep enough to call anything else, but you misidentified that. And it is, it's a real tricky area. That's why it's hard enough to be able to develop or apply these if you were in a real world situation, let alone, that's why I say don't try to memorize all this.
But it
It's hard
shows
enough.
it is outside the 500 on CX, okay?
Correct.
And then yet it shows inside between 1 and 5 on X as well, okay? So again, they're both, could be X, it could be B or C. They're not gonna show B and X, and they're not gonna show C and X.
Right.
They're just gonna show one or the other.
One or the other.
Okay.
And
So
they
C
won't
could be
show.
outside.
They won't show B and C because obviously C is unshaded, X is unshaded there. So you should never have a situation, and if you do, somebody really probably has either drilled down so far deep in the study that they have a B, C, and X because they're like doing the minuscule determination then. And somebody may have done that for their own particular property or their own town, but across the board, that's why you have those larger areas so they can say, hey, we know it can flood here, but we can't really tell you what the depth's going to be because it's not a major situation, but it still could occur.
So it's all X, and it's shaded inside 1 and 5, and it's unshaded outside 5. And that's the best way to look at it.
Pretty much. That's a pretty good summary.
Kurt, can you run that by me again?
I don't think I still have it.
Warmer.
Okay.
Shaded, it's in between 100 and 500.
Yeah.
If it's unshaded, it's 500 over.
Correct.
I'll buy it.
Yeah. That's a good that's a good fundamental reference.
Well, the map we have tomorrow, do you know what has an actual legend on it as well?
Oh yeah, it'll be a regular firm. I don't know what panel they give you because I think they give you different, but it'll be a regular firm with a legend. The front panel that we'll talk about, it'll just be your typical.
And a cross section.
Not gonna be flood count.
Oh, I don't know.
Well, I got that memorized now.
Well, you might.
He told me to memorize.